Recording in progress.
Okay, I'm going to call to order this special meeting of council. First, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Stanawas First Nation. Before we get started this evening, just want to acknowledge the recent passing of former Chief Wayne Edwards. So his funeral, I believe, was today, and again, I just want to take a moment to recognize his contributions between our two communities. Next item on our agenda is adoption of the agenda. So I'll just make the motion that the October 27th, 2021 Special Council meeting agenda, including additional information received under item 5A and replacement tab 6 for the 2022 to 2026 financial plan, be adopted. Do I have a seconder to that? Okay, second by Councillor Savage. Any additional additions or deletions, pardon me? Okay, Councillor Gusselbrook.
I'm just not sure that I have the full agenda. What was 5A?
So 5A would be the green sheets that you've picked up, and those were also emailed out.
So these are the questions and answers from Director Hare.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And then tab 6 is the other piece of paper you've got in front of you, the replacement tab 6. And again, I believe that was emailed out to all members of council. All right, so that was moved and seconded. Any additional questions? I guess additions, deletions? Okay, seeing none or hearing none, I will move to call in the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried unanimously. That takes us on to item 3, adoption of the minutes. So I'll just make the motion that the October 13th special council meeting, October 13th, 2021 special council meeting minutes be approved as presented. So we have that seconded by Councillor Savage. Any discussion on the minutes? And again, just for correctness, that's it. Okay, hearing or seeing none, I will move to call in the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried unanimously. And that takes us on to item 4. I don't believe we have anybody listed this evening for public input period. So that takes us right into item 5 under legislative matters. So we have the 2022 to 2026 5-year financial plan. So we have a PowerPoint presentation and continuation of the October 13th, 2021 review of the 5-year financial plan that was distributed on October 13th. 2021. So from what I understand, Director Hare is, I believe, going to be presenting to us this evening to kick this process off. Is that correct, Director Hare?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah.
Through you to the rest of council. Are you seeing my screen? Sorry.
You're not sharing
PowerPoint
yet.
Oh, sorry. Let me just get this right over here. Hold on, just a quick sec.
And similar format to last time, Director Hare, just questions.
It will be. That's correct.
Okay.
Oops. Bear with me for just a sec. I'm not seeing my PowerPoint when I go to share my screen. So give me just a sec. I'm going to have to bring my PowerPoint presentation up again. My apologies. There we go. Slideshow. Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry for the technical glitch there. Your Worship, to the rest of Council, this is Council's second meeting on the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. The budget pressures facing the municipality were introduced at the October 13th presentation to Council. Budget binders with operating and capital budget information, projected reserves, balances, copy of the October 13th presentation and other budget materials were distributed to Council members and posted on the district website last week. Staff have received a number of questions from Council members, and thank you for sending those questions ahead of time since the binders were distributed. And responses to the questions that were received were shared with all the Council members. That was the green sheets that the Mayor was referring to earlier, and they've been posted on the district website as well. So in terms of today's presentation or meeting, I'm going to recap some of the information from the previous meeting, review Council resolutions from the last budget meeting, review the 2022 budget requests, which are reflected in the information that was contained in the budget information that was distributed to all of Council. I'll review the asset funding graph and infrastructure funding deficit again, recap the utilities operating pressures, and go over the impact to residents of the required property tax revenue increase to balance the budget. And then I will once again do an overview of the capital plan for the next 5 years for the general and utility funds. So you saw this slide at the last meeting as well. So in terms of the budget process, we're currently at the Council presentation stage. And as mentioned earlier, the 2022 to 2026 financial plan, and particularly the 2022 budget pressures, were identified in the October 13th report to Council and in the first budget presentation as well. So the next steps here will be to receive further Council direction and move to the public consultation stage and have Council consider the financial plan bylaw for first 3 readings in late November, with adoption slated for adoption of the financial plan bylaw slated for early December. But just in terms of a recap, there were 2 main drivers for the required property tax revenue increase in 2022. 312,000 of the contribution to reserves in 2021 was funded from the COVID Restart Grant, and this deferred the property tax impact into 2022. So just to be clear, there'll be no additional contribution to reserves in 2022. But the property tax increase will allow contributions to reserves to remain at 2021 levels. Annual contributions to reserves at current levels are not sufficient to address life cycle maintenance and replacement costs. And in reality, the contribution to reserves should be increased in 2022. However, in an effort to strike a balance between taxpayer affordability and sustainability, no increase is being proposed for 2022, given the pressure from having funded these from the COVID Restart Grant. And an additional 204,000 increase in property tax revenue is required to address required increases in operating expenditures to reflect 2022 needs. And I'll review the details of the individual items that comprise the 204,000 in a subsequent slide. And the impact of these increases to the taxpayer or owner of an average assessed property would be about $273 per year. And as we're all aware, that will, the impact on the house owner will vary depending on their assessed value, because our taxes are based on assessed value. So if your house is assessed at under $754,100, you can expect the impact to be less than $273. And if your house is assessed at over $754,000, then you can expect the impact to be higher than $273 a year. So in terms of council resolutions that were passed at the last meeting, the October 13th meeting, council passed resolutions for the financial plan to be prepared reflecting the budget pressures that were identified at the meeting, the ones I just mentioned in the previous slide. And the budget information sent to council members in the budget binders reflected the increases as per the as per these two resolutions listed here. There was a third resolution that was passed with respect to bringing forward revisions to the asset management policy, and that will be brought forward for council consideration in early 2022. So this slide here illustrates the full cost impact of the 2022 budget pressures. The anticipated increase in expenditures, or the total anticipated increase in expenditures, is $688,200. So I'm actually looking at the total number in the first column with numbers in it. And 172 of that increase is being funded through non-taxation and non-market change, so non-taxation revenue. And 516,200 is being funded from an increase in property taxation revenue. So of the 516,200 from property tax revenue, as we've talked about earlier, 312,200 is for maintaining contributions to reserves at the current levels. And then the sum of the remaining numbers, starting at the 103 down to the 21,700 in the last column, totals the 204,000 that I was talking about. And that 204,000 is for operating pressures that have been identified in this table. A detailed discussion and a need of each of these items in the table was included in the October 13th report to council. And just at a high level, these changes address maintaining service levels for the maintenance of district assets at current levels. They also address handling increased quantity of work in planning to meet basic service levels. There is a $50,000 annual provision for one-time projects. These projects are typically driven by council initiatives and aren't always known or identified at the time the budget is prepared. And currently there is no funding provision in the budget for operating projects. They also address inflation and collective agreement and CPI compensation provisions. In protective services, they reflect an increase basically for a 2-hour minimum call-out compensation for on-call firefighters and basically an extra day per week for the fire chief. So our fire chief currently has a budget provision for 3 days a week, and the 2022 budget increases that provision to 4 days a week. The 2022 budget also includes additional provisions for building inspection and bylaw contract services and for casual relief in the buildings and bylaws area. I reviewed this slide with council at the last meeting, and because asset management is both a priority and concern for the District of Lantzville, I think it's important to review this slide again. The information in this slide is based on the current condition of the District of Lantzville's assets and basically reflects required spending to maintain and replace district assets over the next 20 years. Replacement usually happens at the end of the useful life of an asset. And so what basically this graph is showing you is the bars in this graph illustrate the annual spending required on each category of assets for the next 20 years. And if this spending is averaged out, it translates to an average annual amount of just over $1.4 million, which is illustrated by the horizontal light orange bar. Some people said it was yellow, but anyways, light orange bar near the top of the graph. The current contribution to asset reserves is just over $1 million, and that's represented by the horizontal blue line almost in the center of the graph, and that represents what we're putting into asset reserves currently. And the difference or gap between the orange and blue lines is $424,000 per year, and that represents the annual infrastructure funding deficit. So as contributions to reserves remain below the required average annual life cycle investment, reserve balances and contributions to reserves will be insufficient to renew or replace assets when required, and asset renewal and maintenance will be deferred. This will increase the risk of failure of assets and most likely result in disruption to services. This will also result in higher costs of repairs in contrast to if assets or renewal or replacement takes place at an optimal or appropriate time. And just to further carry that example, I've taken from the reserve schedule, which is, I believe, tab 6 in your binders, the balances for the asset reserves. And so what this is showing us is basically that the anticipated reserve balances in 2026 based on current contribution levels and the capital works required over the next 5 years. And what you can see from looking at this illustration is that generally reserve balances will be depleted over time and not sufficient to address needs. I mean, you can see that the fire department equipment reserve is expected to be in the red. The roads infrastructure reserve, which is currently $629,000, will be down to about $154,000. And so they won't be sufficient to address the long-term needs of the organization. The fire department reserve and facility reserve balances are anticipated to have expenditure pressures, large expenditure pressures on them just outside the 5-year financial plan window. So, I mean, even though it looks, I mean, the fire department vehicles reserve, for example, grows from 310,000 to about 711,000. I believe we're going to be needing a new fire truck in 2028 with an approximate price tag of $1 million. So, and when you take a look at our facility life cycle reserves, they're showing a growing balance over the next few years as well. But we really haven't factored in any use of those reserves for any of our facilities. So if we have a public works and a new fire hall continue, it's unlikely we're going to fund that all from borrowed funds. There will be a need to draw on the facility life cycle reserve for part of the funding of those assets. So the point I'm trying to make with this slide is just a continuation of the previous one, that the contributions to reserves reflect an infrastructure funding deficit, and reserve balances will continue to decline, and there will be challenges in addressing renewal and replacement unless we turn our attention to the contributions to reserves. In terms of the, I'm going to jump into the utilities section. So no increases required in the sewer utility fees in 2021. There was additional revenue from newly connected properties, and that revenue exceeded anticipated increase in expenditures for the year, so it allowed for an increase in the contributions to the reserve to the sewer. So the quarterly base charge for sewer will remain at $128 per quarter for 2022. And in terms of water, a 10% increase is required in water rates to cover the anticipated expenditure increases in 2022. And that 10% increase is primarily driven by the anticipated increase in bulk water purchases from Nanaimo. And that will result in a quarterly base rate to increase from $73 to $79 per quarter in 2022. There's no increase expected at this point in time in garbage collection fees. The annual charge for a typical 100-liter cart is $160, and I believe people have the option of receiving a larger cart and they would pay a larger amount. This is billed quarterly. Garbage collection and recycling collection is handled through the RDN. I think I did mention at the last meeting that there's a planned relocation of the BC Recycle plant from, I believe, Nanaimo to Chemainus, but we don't know if that'll have a cost impact or not. So it's just something that we'll keep in mind. We haven't put in a provision for any increase and haven't heard of any increase at this point in time. So if we combine the changes in user fees with the municipal property taxes, we can expect a total annual increase of about $297 a year for the average assessed single-family home in Lantzville as a result of this budget. I've also, as we all know, taxes vary with assessed value, So the impact on a property assessed at a lower value than the average would be less than the average, and an impact on a property assessed at higher than the average would be more. So this graphic just illustrates the impact of the residential property based on various assessed values. And it also shows that if you take a look at the numbers down at the bottom, shows that almost 2/3 of the residential properties will be impacted by some amount less than $273, simply because 2/3 of the properties are assessed under the average value of $754,000. And in terms of our capital program for the general fund, this slide here shows anticipated spending over the next 5 years. The majority of annual required capital spending is on roads and storm drainage assets. We do have a placeholder in 2023 for in protective services for the new proposed fire hall. And so basically annual capital expenditures required range from about $542,000 per year to $7.6 million per year. And so that placeholder will, as better information becomes available to us, we will allocate it to the according year, to the correct years. And this slide here is just to give you a flavor at a high level of the capital projects. All the individual projects with detailed descriptions were included in the financial binders. But these are projects here that we have that will take place in 2022. And so we basically have the commercial core revitalization phase 2, which is dependent on receiving a grant fund. And in terms of road assets and public works assets, we have the Dickinson Road upgrade, multi-use path planned on Lantzville Road, have a culvert replacement on Dickinson Road. And then there is some equipment that needs to be replaced in fire services, replacement of a dump truck, and we will be replacing some of our computers. And there is a server that needs to be replaced this year, and we've got a server room relocation plan in 2022. And to give you a flavor for what's in the pipeline for outer years, essentially, big project in our outer years is the fire hall and public works facility. And we have some significant projects in the roads area as well, Olds Road upgrade, asphalt overlays, and then overlays on several roads in the municipality. We have several culvert replacements listed here. And then there's small equipment that needs to be replaced on an annual basis in protective services or in fire. And we have vehicle replacement in public works and annual information and technology and equipment replacements as well. And in the sewer fund, we replaced significant infrastructure in the last couple of years, so we don't have any significant spending anticipated in the next 5 years. We do need a sanitary sewer master plan to guide us through works that need to be done in the future. So there's a provision in 2024 for a master plan for sewer and sanitary works. And the water utility 5-year program has a couple of placeholders for large projects which are grant dependent. That's the North and South Winds water expansion and the Clark Drive expansion. These estimates will be revised. We very recently received Class D estimates, and these projects are anticipated to have a budget in the $7 million range rather than the 9 and 8.3. I just didn't want to update these slides on the fly because they would be out of sync with the materials that you've received. So I will be updating those budget numbers for the Winds expansion and Clark Drive expansion project, and they'll have an impact on water portion of the projects that are funded through, I guess these two wouldn't qualify for reserves funding because they're not replacement, they're actually new projects. So they are going to have to be, they are in fact in the financial plan as well funded through grant and borrowed funds. And the remaining projects here are water main replacements through the outer years. And those will be funded through asset reserves for the water from the water asset reserves. And in terms of next steps, essentially, what we've got here is we're at the October 27th meeting. And so you've got a budget package with detailed schedules. And depending on what the council recommendations are today, we have an optional meeting on November the 8th. And if no further updates are required, then we would be able to go to, we could avoid that meeting or not have that meeting. We could go to the November 24th meeting, which would be a public input session, after which we would bring the financial plan bylaw forward to council for first 3 readings, with a targeted adoption date of December 1st for the financial plan. And with that, that concludes all of the information I have for this evening to present. And recommendation from staff is that the 2022 to 2026 financial plan, based on information provided to council at both the October 13th and 27th budget meetings, be presented to the public on November 24th and subsequently to council for first 3 readings. And I will turn it over to you, Your Worship.
Okay, again, thank you for your presentation, Director Hare. So through to council, Councillor Kesselbach.
Just through a chair to Director Hare, will we get copies of those slides that weren't in our book? There was just a couple of them.
Yes, through Your Worship to Councillor Gesselberg. This presentation will be posted on the website, and we will distribute copies of today's presentation slides to all council members as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so through to council, in terms of additional questions for Director Hare and staff, we can open it to the floor, and we'll just kind of see where it goes. If council wishes, we can go through the tabs. I know we've done that in the past. I don't know if we necessarily have to do it this year, go through each tab line by line, but if there's general questions coming from each tab, we can maybe approach it that way, go through tab, starting, I believe, tab 4 would be the one. Well, I guess we could start at tab 3 and then ask general questions and then go along that way. It might keep it a bit more organized, but... So through to council, unless there's any strong objections, maybe we'll start at tab 3 and try and keep the questions focused on the information. But again, we're not going to go through line by line. It's just an opportunity to ask questions with respect to each section. So through to council, with respect to questions on starting tab, well, actually, about the presentation, if there's any questions about that, maybe we can start there. Councillor Kesselbach.
Yes, thank you. Fortunately, several of us here on council have written our questions to Director Hare and have received responses, and those are set out in the green sheets, I take it. So that was very nice that Director Hare could do that to maybe save some time during this presentation. There's a lot of technical stuff, and not being a trained accountant, I appreciate getting help going through here. So once again, thank you.
Okay, and additional speakers, I see Councillor Proctor and then Councillor Savage.
I have a sort of a general question through you to Director Hare. And I don't know if you can answer this sort of on the fly or not, Director Hare, but I was wondering if you knew if we removed $50,000 from the budget, how much would that impact the average household amount of taxes that they pay? Is that an easy question to answer, or should I have asked that in advance?
Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
I don't have the answer. It's easy to get the answer. I just can't produce it right while we're talking.
Okay.
But I can get that answer to you.
Okay. Thank you. Then that's my only sort of general question that I have. Thank you.
Again, just asking questions from the presentation. So Councillor Savage.
Yeah, thanks, Director Hare, for supplying answers for those questions. That was great. Appreciate it. And just to clarify a couple of your answers to a couple of my questions, for example, I believe I asked the person that's been contracted for building inspections for the approximate cost of 12 months of having that person. The answer was $37,350. But can I clarify, is that the net cost after we've applied fees from building inspection, or is that the total labor cost for a year? Or what is that figure, $37,350, please?
That is the amount that has been paid to that individual. It is a contract amount, so it's paid. It's not paid. We don't take any deductions off of that amount, and basically it's like an invoice from a third-party contractor.
Right, and you're telling me for a full year it's just 37,000 thereabouts, eh?
I believe so. Yes.
Thank you. And same question, please, for I call them the support staff person for building inspection and bylaw. And the response was $36,830. So is that, again, the gross, or is that the net? Like the gross, meaning that's the total labor cost before building inspection fees are applied?
I'm just going back to your question. It was in your first email, right? And just to make sure that I'm looking at the same information. Which question number was that? Sorry, do you recall?
Well, or just a general question, what the fees might be. It's on you kindly put it in tab 8, right in the middle there, and your answers are in red.
Yeah, I'm just looking at trying to
Second page in tab 8, and you'll see your red answers there.
Yeah.
Is that question 1, answer?
Question, well, it's part of
1E?
question 1.
C, 1C.
Can I put my hand up?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I went to your second set of questions. Oh, okay, there it is right there.
It's just very roughly, it doesn't have to be exact. You're kind of extrapolating. It's only been full-time since July. So we're just somewhat extrapolating. I was just wondering ballpark what it ended up costing for the gross labor.
I'm just going to interject here.
Okay.
Director,
Yeah, that
Young,
would
I
have
see
been-
your hand is up. I don't know if, or even
That would be the gross
Director
cost.
Coates, if someone may know the answer to that question.
Actually, that is the gross cost. That
Yeah.
again, the 36,830.
For a year, right?
I don't believe that person was with us for the full year. I
Right.
believe that person was on a contract.
Yeah, it started 0.6 time, and then beginning of July, that was increased to full-time.
Oh, sorry, I confused the two positions. My apologies. Yes, okay.
I
Yes,
know.
that would be the 36,830 would be the gross cost.
For 12 months.
Yes,
Yeah.
charged to salaries.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. And final quick one, please. You've got the total dollar increase for 2022 at $688,200.
Yes.
And we're minusing $172,000 for non-tax income. And that would be the $55,000 of the foothills. And I'm guessing most of that balance would be from building inspection fees, which were $128,000 year to date in August 31st. So a big portion of that would be building inspection fees, correct?
That is correct.
Yep, thanks very much.
Point of information.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Gaspar.
Yeah, I couldn't follow that. I went by too quickly. was through you to Director Hare, were those the numbers that were in tab 8 under the 2022-2026 financial plan, schedule of 2022 budget provisions? Is that what you're referring to, Director Hare?
That is correct. So essentially, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Gesselbrecht.
Yeah,
In the last question, I believe Councillor Savage was talking about the 172,000 from non-taxation sources. So of the 172,000, 55,000 was from non-market change. There was a note underneath that table that showed the breakdown, showing 117 from building permit and development permit revenue and 55 from non-market change.
but that's not a table that we have. That you just showed that tonight.
No, that was a response to the first question from Councillor Savage in the series of questions that I received, and it is in tab 8 of your binder. It's attached to the questions. And I did show it in tonight's presentation as well. That's correct. So the same information that is in that table that is in tab 8 of your binder was in this evening's presentation as well. I just didn't show the footnote in the slide.
Anything further, Councillor Gesselbrecht, on that?
Thank you.
Is there anything further, Councillor Savage? Just trying to limit the questions to the presentation, and I suppose if there's any clarification required from the answers and questions, or questions answers that were supplied.
I have no other questions on any of the tabs other than that, just so you know. Thank you.
Okay, and then Director Coates, did you have some, I don't know if there's something there.
It's probably a little late. I just wanted to clarify that in one case you were talking about a contract company, and in the other instance you're talking about a QP bargaining unit position. So we don't go into details about QP individuals, but we can tell you the hourly rate is the same for the front staff, for all of the front staff. It's $29.03 an hour during probation, and then it goes up to $30.56 an hour.
Okay, thank you for that. So I have a couple questions, and I see Councillor Proctor's got her hand up again, so just give me a second here. Yeah, so from the presentation, I just had a couple quick questions, or maybe just clarification points. So there was reference to the Water for the Winds, 7 million, and just to make sure I'm perfectly understanding here, you classifying that as a new project, which it would be, and we cannot use reserves. Does that include DCC reserves, or is it just reserves in the Waterworks Reserve Fund? Just to get clarification, would it be a DCC eligible project, or would we, or is it not?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I believe it would be a DCC eligible project, given what DCCs are intended for. However, I can review the terms of reference for DCCs, but generally your asset reserves are for renewal. The Waterworks Reserve is for renewal and replacement. So if this was an expansion, I don't believe the reserve would qualify as a funding source. So I may have spoken out of turn. I mean, if the reserve allows for expansion, then you could use a reserve, but typically the reserves are not our Waterworks reserves
Okay.
do not allow you to use reserves for new projects.
Okay, it just kind of caught me off guard because I'm just going based on memory here. I thought our water reserve fund did include new, like expansion, and then also it would be DCC eligible, but I see Director Young's got his hand up. He might be able to shed some light on it.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I can confirm the one part of it. It is a DCC project, the Winds water expansion.
Okay, thank you. And then, again, I'd have to look at the Waterworks Reserve Fund. I thought it was for expansion as well, but I could be wrong. I remember last term using it as part of a debate, but again, I could be wrong.
I can provide clarification on that.
Sure, that'd be appreciated. And then just one other, I guess, comment, or actually I guess two. The first one is just like the number of properties. So there was that graphic that just showed the average assessed value graphic. It's in our materials this evening, but it was also included in so it would be page, well, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 5 and 6 of our green sheets that were handed out tonight, but it was also in the presentation. I was just curious, like with the number of properties, it tallied it up, and we have 1,651 total properties. Does that include all commercial industrial properties, or is that just residential?
This graph just included residential properties.
This is residential. Okay, so we've had some growth, because I've always used the number of, I think it was 1,450, 1,500, but yeah, I guess we've had.
I based it on the number of folios. So one thing that may get included in folios is, I mean, I did notice in the assessments there were some relatively low valued assessments. So they could be docks that people have that may have been picked up, but as it's the number of folios that we used to run into that on Bowen all the time. So when we received information from BC Assessment, they assigned a separate folio for docks. So I haven't had a chance to look into what those would be, but basically it is the number of folios which represent properties from BC Assessment.
Okay, thank you. And just historically, we have always, I think in the past anyways, looked at it in terms of number of dwelling units or residential dwelling units. And again, it's, it's going back a couple of years, but, 1,450, and probably Director Young, I don't know if there's anything you can add to that, but again, it just seems to be like there's been a big jump considering, from my understanding, we've had about 20 or so new housing starts a year over the last few years. So just seems like we've had a big jump. Just curious about that, but anyways, I don't know, Director Young, did you want to comment on that or just leave it?
Just that number also was a surprise to me. I was generally operating on the assumption that we had about 1,400 residential properties. So, but if that's the number, it is what it is.
Okay, so I'm not the only one. Thanks.
Well, this would include vacant land parcels as well, just for clarification. Okay. Because vacant land parcels do pay property tax.
Oh, of course, yes. And then the only other one was, and this is just more of a general comment around the pressures, and really we got the two pressures. We got the staff pressure, and then we have the asset reserve pressure. From where, and I guess we'll probably debate this more at another time, but, we still have that funding gap of $424,000, and what I'm looking at in this budget are there monies that we can be moving towards closing that funding gap, and whether it's gas tax monies from projects, or and looking at the staffing as well, like do we delay the staffing to halfway through the year and put some of that savings towards the closing that gap? But it's just more of a comment with respect to the presentation that was given. But I would like to work on some solutions around closing that gap even this year, even if the tax increase ends up being the same. I do think it's important to try and start working on closing that gap earlier rather than later. So because we're kind of in a holding pattern based on last year, and using the COVID restart funding to kind of balance our budget with respect to our asset reserve contributions. So just a comment more than anything. That's all I've got for right now. I see Councillor Proctor, you've still got your hand up, and then Councillor Gusselbach.
Thank you. Through you to Director Hare, I did a simple math problem, and I just want you to confirm or not if I took the right approach. If a $516,200 tax increase means that the average homeowner pays $273, and I set up a simple ratio, then a $50,000 tax increase would mean the average homeowner pays $26.44. Would that be the way you would approach figuring that out?
The average homeowner would pay $26. And how did you come up with the 26.44? I'm sorry.
I set up a ratio, 516,200 to 273 increase would equal a $26.44 increase on $50,000.
It'd probably be pretty close. I would just figure out what a 1% tax rate increase would be.
Oh,
then,
okay.
Yeah, I would just, sorry, I don't have my calculator in front of me, and so.
But I think that that's probably pretty close, within a
It should
few
be pretty
cents of what you
close, yeah.
get. So if I use that same technique, a $10,000 increase is $5.29 for the average household. Of which, you know, 2/3 of the houses in Lantzville are below that. So, yeah, I just wanted to point out how much taking a little bit off the budget, what effect that would have on houses, and it's not very much.
You would be correct. You would be correct in that statement. It wouldn't be a large impact on the individual home.
No. So taking, like, say, 50,000 out of the budget is going to impact the average house less than $26 a year. So not even $2 a month.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gusselbrecht.
Yes, through the chair to Director Hare, I'm looking at the green sheets that we got, which include those two charts at page, 5 and 6 of the additional information for tonight. Very interesting information here, because up till now, we've been talking about the average house price in Lantzville, which was around $754,000. I don't live in a house that has that assessed value. I live in a house that has an assessed value of close to the $554,000. And incidentally, I went back through my property taxes over the 6 years that I've been on council, and I noticed that my assessed value over those 6 years has actually increased 41%. That's the assessed value. Houses in my neighborhood, similar style, were going for $800,000. So it's been a remarkable increase. So my question is this: taking the assessed value similar to a house that I live in, that second column, if all of the asset management increase and the operational budget increase went through, that would mean that I would pay $200 extra a year, or $17 a month. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
I'm sorry?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Gesselbrecht. Yes, that would be correct.
All right. I've done some addition. I'm not as good as Professor Proctor, but if we look at the second chart, the first chart, which has the number of properties, or the second chart. Second chart, you've added up that all of the properties with an assessed value of $754,000 or less, there's actually 1,086 properties. Whereas the second coordinate, which is properties over and above $754,000, but I assume it doesn't include properties over $1 million, there's another 565. Am I reading this correctly so far?
So the 565 would be all properties with an assessment in excess of $755,000. So it would include the ones that are in excess of $1,054,000 as well.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because I notice on the page before that, you have the number of properties under each column. And I thought if you added all of those, the 244, 370, 472, 127, 167 plus 271 properties that are in excess of $1 million, it looks like you come up with 1,922 portfolios.
I
Is
think you
that
come out
correct?
with, it should come out to 1,561.
Okay, so, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I had done the math earlier, and they had added up, and I can quickly do the math right now.
All right. So anybody in the public who wants to see what the actual tax increase would be is to look at these two pages, and these will be through the chair to staff. Will these charts be in the agenda for next meeting, or are they in for this meeting?
These green pages will be shown for this meeting. If people go to the calendar for the meeting, it'll be shown as additional information.
All right.
It's already there, actually.
So the
That's how
public,
you received it by link, yeah.
all right, so the public can see that. And yes, I've just added these up on my computer, and I get 1,651 properties.
That's correct.
You gave us another stat, and that is also found as additional information under tab 8 of our yellow binders. And you were asked, I believe, by Councillor Proctor, what was the median assessment? So that's different than the average. So the median assessment for properties in Nanaimo, or pardon me, Lantzville, is $625,000, meaning that 50% of the properties in Lantzville had a 2021 assessed value below 625, and 50% were above 625,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Those are interesting statistics. Thank you.
Okay, additional speakers. I see Councillor Proctor's got her hand up, but I'm calling for, I guess it'd be second time speakers or, okay. I don't have anything. Councillor Wilson, did you have your hand up? No? Okay, Councillor Proctor then?
I really wanted to talk about the median assessment and the difference between median and average. And I think that that was covered pretty clearly a second ago. But the median assessment, I just wanted to clarify it just a little bit further. The median assessment is the assessment that if your house is assessed at $625,000, half of the houses in Lantzville are assessed above you and half are assessed below you. So the average value is 750, but there's way more than half of the properties are assessed at below 750. The average is different than the median. The median is the price that's absolutely in the middle. If you list all the prices, the median's the one in the middle. And depending on how far apart the range of numbers you're looking at is, skews the average off the median. And we have, in a relatively small community, a fair number of properties that are in the millions because they're on the waterfront. So that skews the average price. Most of us live in houses that are assessed below $800,000. Thank you.
Okay, Director Hare, I see your hand is up.
Oh, sorry, I meant to put it down. Sorry about that.
And then I believe I saw Councillor Savage, your hand was up.
Yes, thank you. If this is at all helpful if people are making decisions tonight, in October 2019, staff told us there were 1,710 folios in Lantzville, and in 2018, I was told there was 1,416 homes in Lantzville, if that's helpful. And when I looked at it last year from memory, the Waterworks Replacement Reserve Fund did include water expansion, water system expansion. Yep.
All right, so unless there's any further questions about the presentation and the questions and answers that were received, we'll move into the actual financial plan, and that would be starting on, I believe, tab 3. So I don't know if there's any specific questions for staff with regarding tab 3. And tab 3 is basically the sewer operating, well, if any member of council wants to go back to tab 2, which is a general operating budget, we can do that as well. I don't know if there's any specific questions about either of those two. Maybe we'll kill two birds with one stone here. Okay, Councillor Savage.
Yeah, I had these questions for later, but might as well do them now. I'm just wondering what this is about. It appears this 50,000 special projects fund can be used for staff overtime, and that straddles tab 3, and then in tab 1 it gives that summary. So I'm just wondering what that is about. There's $50,000 slated for special projects, so I wasn't quite clear on that. Then it says under overtime that that's tab 7, page 8, heading overtime. It states additional overtime is not included in the budget, but is to be included as a special project request. So this 50,000, in other words, can accommodate staff overtime?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Savage, that 50,000 is the provision that I spoke about for one-time projects, for one-time operating projects. So essentially, and one-time operating projects are typically driven by council initiatives. They're not always known at this time, so it would be a contributions to reserves. It is not intended to cover any labor costs, overtime, or any other labor cost as such. That is a contribution to a reserve, and then operating projects would be funded out of that reserve. If operating projects in 1 year happened to be 35,000, there would be 15,000 left in that reserve in the following year. So it allows for funding provision for one-time operating projects for which there is no provision in the reserve. And special projects identified in tab 8, tab 7 that you spoke about are in the financial plan guidelines for Lantzville, and special projects are spoken about in there, but they're not clearly defined. I don't like using the term special project. It's much clearer if you use the term one-time operating projects.
Understood. So the special projects, the 50,000 one is different than this other special project for funding overtime, correct?
I'm not aware of any special projects for funding overtime. I'm not sure about that. So
okay,
I can just say that this 50,000 is a contribution to a reserve to fund one-time operating projects.
Yeah, okay, it's just that's what it says. Tab 7, page 8, under the heading overtime, it states additional overtime is not included in the budget, but is to be included as a special project request.
So I believe when I read that line, what it said was staff would put forward to council a special request form if they were requesting overtime, and then council would approve those on a one-by-one basis. So there's no reference to $50,000 here. And that 50,000 has nothing to do with overtime.
Thank you for clearing that up. And you just said you don't like this word special project, so that's probably one reason why, right? It says that exact thing, special project. I understand the difference now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have more of a comment rather than a question. It has to do more so with tab 2. It's always difficult to try and tease out, how much we are spending on staffing from year to year, and because and in tab 2, it shows more of the administration side of it, but it doesn't always show what we're spending on salaries and basically employee remuneration for the year. So I've gone back and I've looked at the SOFI reports and for the years, and this is all on the district's website, and just using 2018 as a bit of a baseline, and that's what the 2018 to 2000 basically, that's what the 2014 to 2018 council left us as a starting point or as a baseline. So it was basically about 1,049,000, and since then, with this projected budget, we're looking at adding about $144,000, and that's been over our term. So using the 2018 $1,049,000 as a baseline as starting point, we are now have increased it, or will be potentially increasing it to 1.8 million, or sorry, 1,894,500 approximately, which would be about a $844,000 increase, or an 80% increase over our term. The one thing maybe this is a question, and I'm just thinking as I'm going here, with respect to our asset management contributions, have we seen an 80% increase in our asset management contributions over our term? Because I see the two being in obviously competition in terms of the pressures we're now coining the term as related to our budget. But the one thing I would like to potentially examine is, are we treating our asset management contributions with the same level of importance as the staffing? And again, that's a huge amount of money we've increased. And if you go back a little bit further and look at previous terms, it's quite amazing, the difference in the spending. So between 2011 and 2018, over those two terms, there was an increase in spending for basically staff remuneration of approximately $348,000. And our one term is projected to be about $844,000. So again, we have competing interests, and what I would like to see is that we're fairly dealing with these competing interests while imposing, tax increases on our residents. So again, we'll see where this all goes, and obviously there's a public process, but I'm just throwing that out at this point. Additional speakers, so I see Councillor Gusbrek, you have your hand up.
Yeah, my understanding was we were going to ask staff questions about the report and not debate. I don't know where you got those figures, but I'm going to hope that Director Hare has heard what you said and will look at that for a debate at a separate time, because I've got a different reading of any increase in staffing. We've had confusing time with COVID where we receive COVID monies. We've used those. So let's save the debate for a different time and maybe stick to going through each of the tabs and asking questions so that we can get that clarified. Thank you.
Okay, through to council, is there questions, comments with respect to tab 2 and 3? Okay, hearing none, we can, I see Councillor Proctor, your hand is up.
Thank you. You raised a really interesting point, and through you to staff, I'm wondering what sort of increase in asset management we really should be looking at, rather than the meager contributions we've made to the whole thing since we started as council.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Proctor, we know that our asset funding gap is $424,000 a year. And so the intention of bringing forward a policy for council consideration would be recommending what the annual increase to reserves should be. So you need to look at it in the context of affordability for your community, and yet also in the context of having an approach to address that asset funding deficit. So many communities that have been basically who started their addressing their asset management deficit late had increases anywhere from 5 to 10% a year just for asset management. And then there's other communities who for the past 20 years have been applying a 1.5% increase, tax rate increase to basically dedicate towards increasing their contributions to their asset reserves.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I think we took a similar approach with our staffing. We inherited a staffing report that the previous council asked and asked for and received. And we've taken an approach to increase staff gradually as we could and still provide good service to the community. And now we're going to be looking at an asset management plan that while we have increased our contributions to assets, we need to look at a long-term plan that does it realistically in a similar way to the way we have realistically risen staff levels, which still aren't near the recommended level that we were inherited from the 2018 council. Thank you.
Any additional comments on tab 2.3? And for myself, again, the reason I bring up this staffing, it's difficult within the budget, at least for myself anyways, to try and tease that information out. That's why I was referencing the Sophie report. Obviously, there's no Sophie report for this year, but again, projected, there are some numbers. So, and again, I don't know, maybe staff can answer his question, like how much work would it be to figure out how much we have over this term increased our asset management contributions, like in terms of percent change? Would that be a really onerous task? Like, I don't want to assign or ask staff to do something that's going to require a ton of time, but how onerous of a process would that be to figure out?
Your worship, that wouldn't be too onerous a process to work out. I'm just looking, I don't believe it's in the information that, well, actually, we've got the reserve contributions, year over year reserve contributions that are part of your budget book. So we could take the information from there and show you what the increase year over year has been, increase or decrease, depending on what the case is.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point, because like last year, obviously we used the COVID restart funds to balance that off. So, okay. Anything further for tab 2.3 before we move on to tab 4? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to tab 4, which is our water operating budget. So any pointed questions for staff? Give everybody a second to look. Okay. Going once, twice, we can move on to tab 5. So this is our capital budget. This is usually, Director Hare, did you have a comment on tab 4?
Your worship, I was going to go back to a previous, I'm not sure if it was a question or a comment, but you were talking about labor, year over year labor costs.
Yes.
And that you found it difficult to find what the labor costs were from our budget documents. So if I could refer you to page 3, for example, in tab 2, we have a wages and benefit line for each department, and we only have about 4 departments highlighted in tab 2. So if you go halfway down the page, there's a wages and benefits line item, which goes from 2019 all the way to 2022. And that would be the correct tab to compare. You wouldn't want to use SOFI information to compare, because SOFI information contains a lot of information that's not in the budget. So for example, if staff don't take their allotted vacation and are paid out for vacation time, those numbers are reflected in SOFI, as well as other types of compensation. So really to compare, to get a year-over-year comparison, you would really want to take a look at your actuals from the financial statements. And you've got 2 years of actuals and a year of projected in your budget information that's been distributed to you. And so, for example, page 3 shows the wages and benefits in the general government line item. And then if you were to jump over to page 5, you see a similar wages and benefits line item for fire services, and so on for protective services and for roads or transportation services and planning, rather.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I do understand that piece. It'd be nice if they're all on the same page. It'd just be simpler rather than jumping around from tab to tab. And you know, my rationale for it, not to get into a debate here with yourself, but in terms of the SOFI information, I do recognize that there are factors that play, but I think overall it does show the trend from year after year with total staff remuneration. But but in terms of exacts, I do appreciate your comments. Moving us on to, yes, we're on to tab 4. So this would be, actually, hold on, I've lost my place. Sorry, we're on to tab 5. So now we're on to the capital budget. Questions through to council. So I got Councillor Savage.
Yes, this relates to tab 5 through to staff, please, with our $475,000 for a design for a fire hall public works. The option of using another municipality's design, for example, Cumberland just finished their new fire hall, and there's others that are in the process of finished or are planning to. Is it not possible just to use their design for a fire hall? And if there are proprietary factors here, copyrights for the design and so on, I dare say it would still be far less money to ask the same architect if we could have permission to use the same design and to work out a cost far less than from starting from scratch. Is that a possibility we could look into or has been looking into?
Looking for someone to light up on our screen here. Who's going to respond?
Chief Ruckus, any response to that?
Through your worship, Councillor Savage, I really don't. I don't have an answer for you on that one. It's not something that we've looked into. Is it possible? I would have to say I would assume that yes, it is. However, in saying that, there is some customizable stuff that we'd be looking for as well within a fire department that fit the design and fit of Lantzville.
Yes, thank you. Okay, to be looked into then. We'll leave it at that. And even if there were qualifying differences one would want specifically here, I dare say if you start with a blueprint from elsewhere, it would certainly have a lot of the cost savings. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. Something to be looked into. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Director Young, I saw your hand shoot up, but is that... Okay. I have Councillor Proctor next, and... Okay.
Thank you. Firstly, I have a question. I have been looking through this tab, and I don't see that budget line for the design of the fire hall. Could you refer me to a page that was discussing?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Proctor, it won't be in here because that resolution called for an amendment of the 2021 financial plan. That amendment will be coming forward to council later in November or early December. In late December, I'm working on that right now.
So we weren't actually discussing something in this tab. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yes.
I do have a question about, on this, the second page of tab 5 about the, water replacement to the winds. I know these figures are going to be updated, but currently it says it's roughly 6,000 in grant funding and roughly 3 million in debt. Would that refer to how much we'd get the grant and how much the amount would be for a local or area service agreement?
That is my understanding. Yes.
And so it would work the same way it's split out for the Clark Drive. Here, I know we've got a new estimate. It's going to be a little bit less, but nonetheless, we're applying for a grant that would be 5.5 million, and the Clark Drive residents would have to agree to pay the 2.7 million to have the water line run around the neighborhood.
That is correct.
Thank you. And I had the other questions I had about this answered from staff earlier today, so I'm not going to interrupt the meeting flow with that. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions? Director Young, I see your hands back up.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor, my technology wasn't working. Just in response to the earlier question about using someone else's design, no, that would not be a feasible option, so that's not an option that we would explore.
Okay, thank you for that response. All right, through to council. Again, we're just on tab 5. I did have a question, and I didn't submit this, but and we've had I believe responses in the past, but it has to do with the municipal's borrowing capacity. So do we have a general indication or idea what our current borrowing capacity is for the district? So for capital projects, so if we're looking at down the road at potentially borrowing for fire hall and so on, and for these water expansion projects, or do we have enough capacity? I guess that's really the question.
Your worship, that is indicated on a worksheet that we do for Sophie. I apologize, I haven't had a chance to look at that worksheet. I will take a look at that worksheet and respond to all of council after this meeting and let them know what our borrowing capacity is.
Okay, I appreciate that. My concern is that we're obviously not overextending ourselves, but I can't remember offhand the last time a former director of financial services spoke about our borrowing capacity, but I know it's not as high as I once thought it was, but anyways, we do have a finite amount of borrowing capacity, so it'd be important to have that information for council's benefit. That's all I have. So through to the rest of the council. Again, we're just on tab 5. So Councillor, I see, okay, so Councillor Savage and Councillor Proctor.
Yes, for Director Hare, please. Have you calculated the mill rate, if we stick to this budget, what it would be?
I did calculate what the mill rate would be. However, your mill rate varies with assessed value. So when it comes time to actually do our tax rate bylaws, if assessments go up considerably, it's very likely your mill rate will go down, because we're talking about increase in taxation, a fixed increase in taxation revenue here. So I basically did, in I believe the previous presentation, have the mill rate indicated in the chart that showed the impact on the individual household. I'm just going to look for that tab if you're wanting that mill rate.
Yeah, that's fine. I can look that up. I didn't realize.
Yeah, if you take a look at the previous presentation, I believe the residential mill rate for 2021 was 1.7081. And for 2022, based on no changes in assessed value, it would be 2.0685. But given what the real estate market has been, assessed values will probably go up, so that mill rate will go down.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. And then the other quick one, please, is the last meeting you indicated it looked like it would be around $24,100 for every percent of tax increase. Is that still the case? And have you worked out what this tax increase would be for this budget as is?
Again, I'm reluctant to talk percentages because the dollars are so small for Lantzville. But yes, it would be about 24,100 would represent a 1% tax rate increase.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I have Councillor Proctor and then Councillor Gusselbrook.
Just a quick point. The last time that I inquired about our lending capacity, it was around 12 million, and that's before we borrowed for phase 3 sewer. So if anybody's really wondering, it's going to be in that ballpark somewhere. Less than that because we've had phase 3 sewer.
Thank you for that. I couldn't remember off the top of my head. So, Councillor Gusselbrook.
Thank you. Through you to staff, to Director Hare. Just to follow up on a point, we're talking about mill rates. So the basic formula is that if the assessed value of all of the property in Lantzville goes up into 2022, and we get those assessments, I believe, first week in January, is that correct?
We actually will base the mill rate on the assessments we receive in March or April. I believe it's March.
All right.
So we receive a preliminary assessment value in November, and then we receive what they call a completed roll in January, and the revised roll comes in, I believe, March or the beginning of April. So that's the final that has adjustments reflected by BC Assessment Authority. And that's what we base the mill rate for the tax rate bylaw on.
All right. So let's assume that the assessed value of all the property in Lantzville goes up, which seems to be a good bet for 2022, the mill rate will decrease.
That is correct. The mill rate will go down so that you will collect the same amount. So we're looking to collect in this budget an additional 512,000, was it? The sum of about 512,000. And so regardless of what the assessment is, that's what we want to collect. So if the assessments go down, the mill rate will go, assessments go up rather, the mill rates will go down. So we're still collecting the amount that we presented in budget presentation.
So, once again, looking back in my property tax assessments over the last 6 years I've been on council here, I noted that in 2 of the 6 years, my property taxes actually went down. And scratching my head on that, I assume that my taxes went down because I live in a modest house with a assessment now of $586,000, that somebody on the other side of the fulcrum, other side of the median house price, their taxes went up. Is that a fair assumption?
In part, that's a fair assumption. The other idea on taxation has a twofold. One, there is the amount of extra revenue that we increase, and then your individual property tax is based on how your assessment changes relative to the average and relative to other properties in Bowen. So if your assessment changes by less than the average, and somebody else's changes by more than the average, there is a shift in taxes going on there. So your taxes go down, and those people whose properties went up by more than the average are taking on a share of taxes that you were paying in the past. So there is a twofold change going on. There is a redistribution of taxes within the system based on what your property is worth relative to other properties within the municipality. And then there's also the additional taxation revenue that we're looking to collect to balance the budget.
So I understand, if the average assessed value of houses in Lantzville rose, let's say 11%, but my individual assessment for that year only rose 6%, then I will get a benefit in the sense that my tax bill will be a bit lower.
That's correct. The tax bill, there'll actually be a shift of taxes from your property onto other properties. And you'll receive the benefit of that.
So once again, looking at that chart in the green pages, on either page 5 or 6, I like the one on page 6, I guess it is, where you show the number of houses less than $750,000 assessment, and the houses on the other side of that point, which are greater. Is it fair to say that the higher assessed properties will likely go up more than the average value, assuming that that the general assessment goes up? Let's say property assessed values in BC go up 11%, they go up 11% in Lantzville, that those properties on the richer side of that median, they're going to get a bigger tax bill than my neighbors on the lower side of that median tax price. Is that a fair assumption?
It would be a fair assumption to say that so when I prepared this particular graphic and the numbers I have in here, I have no idea how individual property assessments are going to change. So I've just assumed that I've basically assumed there's no shift in taxes going on between properties, and we're just, all other things being equal, we're just talking about assessment values remaining relatively the same, or assuming that if assessments go up, everybody's assessments go up by the same amount in this illustration. So this illustration does not take into consideration that some assessed values may change by more or less than others. I'm not sure if that explanation answers your question.
I'll have to ask somebody that has a $3 million assessment next year, see if there's one up percentage-wise much higher than my assessment. So I'll hold off till then. Thank you.
Okay, so we are on tab 5, so we're on the capital budget. So in terms of additional questions for staff with respect to tab 5, capital. So Councillor Proctor?
I just had a tiny bit to add to the last discussion. Director Harry, your explanation made total sense to me, but this is just anecdotal evidence from what I've observed in the 30 years I've lived in Lantzville. Some properties have really risen in assessed value compared to others. For instance, when I first moved here in 1991, you could buy a beachfront property for $300,000. I don't think there's a beachfront property assessed for under $1.5 million now. They have, the beachfront, for instance, has risen in 30 years in assessed value a lot more rapidly than the home I live in. And so I think in some cases, and I think it has really hit the waterfront owners, probably notice it more than any of the other upper end homes from just my observations. Thank you.
Okay, additional, again, we're on to the tab 5, capital budget. Any additional comments, questions for staff with respect to tab 5? Okay, hearing none, moving on to tab 6. So this takes us on to reserves. So we have had some discussion about reserves, but are there any further questions for staff with respect to reserves? Okay, hearing none, we can move on then to tab 7, which is our financial plan guidelines. So that's pretty straightforward. That's from Councillor Proctor.
I'm sorry, I had a question about the DCCs.
Oh, okay, so back to reserves. So through to you, Councillor Proctor.
I'm wondering if the DCC contributions are going to be able to keep up with the projected costs of road maintenance in the future. Are we going to run out of funds for the road maintenance in our budget? Is it going to be funded by DCCs?
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Proctor, I don't believe there is any of the DCC reserves can be used for regular road maintenance. So essentially, it is just, currently we have the road maintenance reserve, I believe, or the roads infrastructure reserve. And it indicates that reserve has a declining balance. And in fact, if you go to the end of 2024, that reserve is in a negative balance. So we won't be able to fund all of the roads maintenance works that are in the 5-year plan through that reserve for that particular year. And you can see that annual spending on roads infrastructure is anywhere from, or required spending is anywhere from about $200,000 to $1 million a year. So an annual contribution, the annual contribution was increased to $650,000 in 2022, and we've got projected, even with the projected increases, we're seeing that reserve balance is being depleted.
Thank you.
Any additional questions, comments with respect to tab 6? All right, hearing none, we can, again, under tab 7, it's just the financial plan guidelines. I don't know if there's any questions for staff under that tab. It was somewhat covered off in the presentation. And then through to council, next item then in our agenda would be looking at motions to amend the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. So if there's any amendments. Okay. And actually, interesting enough, I don't even think this is through to Director Coates. We don't have it technically on the floor. So in terms of just procedure, are we just looking at recommended amendments to staff to then later bring back a report, or do we need to get that? I noticed Director Hare had a motion in his presentation.
Yes, that was the motion for authorization to take it, if you had no changes, to take it forward for consideration of 3 readings and for public input. If council wishes to make changes, now would be the time, and you would, sorry, I should have given you the template, but it's usually in the form, here, I'll pull one up for you, and it's...
Well, we do have the templates in the agenda under 5A2. So it just says that the draft 2022-2026 financial plan be amended. So this is basically page 2 of our agenda. In tab, insert the number by...
Yeah, usually you'd be, so it's there. Tab, and then insert by adding or deleting description and the amount, yeah.
Okay. So Councillor Gaspard, did you have a question?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand what Director Coates had to say. Is my understanding that we made a motion, or 2 motions, 3 motions actually, at the last budget meeting, And though two of those motions were to include what we saw on the board, a $312,000 for asset management and $240,000 for operational budget. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And based on those motions, Director Hare prepared the pages that you have in front of you now. What is showing on the agenda, and as well as on the slide, there was a motion, and so you could proceed to that, or you can go into item 5A2 on page 2 of the agenda, where there's a format there if you want to make further changes to the financial plan.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm still having trouble. You say there was a motion on the slide. Is that a motion to pass the 2022 to 2026 budget? Or are the motions that we passed at the last meeting the motions that are on the floor and the motions that will go to the public hearing, subject to any amendments that are made?
I guess I could refer to Councillor Hare Director Hare on this, but my understanding is that you passed 3 motions at the last meeting. Those have been incorporated into the financial plan. And as well, this is your financial plan, so if at any point in this process, council wants to change something specifically, you can do that, and the form of the motion is on page 2 of the agenda. In the presentation given tonight, there was a closing motion provided. If council wished to not take further amendments and to move forward, and so the motion was, we could pull it up on the screen, but it was to proceed to that you would not require the next financial plan meeting, which was an alternative or an optional meeting, that staff would proceed to prepare to go to the November 24th, I'm struggling here, sorry, to the public input meeting and the special meeting. And so you have choices. I don't know what else to say. You have choices. If you want to make further changes, there's a form for doing that. If you don't want to make further changes, you could proceed to the motion that was in the PowerPoint slide.
Okay, could through the chair, could Director Hare please put the motion up on the slide? Because before we can make any motions to amend, there has to be a master motion, so to speak, that we amend. So if we could see that motion and give us some time to maybe write that down so we're clear what that motion is.
So go ahead, Director Coates.
I was just going to say, the form you followed in prior budgets is it's not an amendment of that motion. It's an amendment of the financial plan that's in front of you. So you have a financial plan in front of you. If you want to make some changes to it, you can pass, make a motion that the draft 2022-2026 financial plan be amended in tab, and then be specific which tab and what the amendment is you would like. You can put the account line if you want. The more details, the better. And yeah.
If you have the motion in front of you.
I can see it now. I'm just writing it down if we could just have a little bit of time.
Okay. Did you have any further questions, Councillor Gusbrock? No. And just in terms of clarity, with respect to the 2 motions that were passed last meeting, that was to give staff direction to prepare the financial plan binder and set basically the I forget the lingo that was used, but just set the budgeted, or I forget what it was, let's say the bar anyways for the financial plan. So through to you, Councillor Savage.
Yes, I have 4 short and simple amendments, please. We'll start with the first. that the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan be amended in tab 3, page 3, by increasing the mayor's remuneration to $25,000 per year.
I'm sorry, that was a little fast for me. If you could just repeat that slowly, thanks.
Okay, it's the generic form you gave us to make motions that the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan be amended in tab 3, page 3, by increasing
No,
the,
there's no page 3, Councillor Savage.
the mayor's remuneration to $25,000 per year.
And I believe that would fall.
Point of order, I'm not following the pages and the lines that I've been given. I'm not sure
Okay,
where to look.
just 2 seconds, Councillor Pryor, point of information. Through to Director Coates. I'm not following the reference either, so. Oh, man.
Is there
Or
another
Director Hare, where would
location?
that fall?
And as well, if you wish to leave this motion on the floor with a correct location, you would also want to add an amendment, to the motion to say, and further that staff be directed to bring forward an amendment to the remuneration bylaw.
Point of order.
Okay, point of order, Councillor Gusselbrock.
Yes, remuneration, I'm otherwise happy with the
That's
motion,
not a
but.
point of order.
So,
That's-
Yeah, the
it's-
point of order is this. We have a remuneration, elected officials remuneration bylaw. To amend that, we have to go through the normal amending processes. I don't believe it can be done simply through the budget. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And I apologize, it's tab 2, page 3, under council remuneration. Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll get the amendment on the floor. I don't believe it's out of order. I think there's probably a couple different ways to skin a cat here, but unless we have the money in the budget for 2022, no increases can occur. So the amendment to the remuneration bylaw for council would have to come after, but it would need to happen at some point, I'm assuming. So through to staff, if you can confirm.
Yeah, yes, you would be, this motion would be instructing a change to the financial plan. What I had spoken to earlier was I would also recommend that you add, and then further that, staff be directed to bring forward an amendment to the council remuneration bylaw number 170.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'll include that, what you said. Thank you.
What were those numbers again?
It's council remuneration bylaw number 170, 2018. It's the citation of council's remuneration bylaw.
No, what was the increase?
It was 25,000.
It was per year, 25,000. Sorry,
Oh.
it was an increase to 25,000 per year, not an increase of 25,000.
I'll second that.
Okay, so for discussion on the amendment, so through you, Councillor Savage, and then the Councillor.
Yeah, this one's very simple, but I remember clearly when this first came up in early 2019, this whole topic of remuneration came up because Bowen Island had just done a remuneration study which mentioned Lantzville. So that meant we wouldn't have to do a study, and we were so long overdue for it. But during the discussions, it was quite obvious the mayor's salary was comparatively low. When you look at a list of other municipalities, the mayor is considerably more. I think he's around 19,000 to our roughly 13,000 now. And during these discussions, it was pointed out that, well, you do have your RDN salary as well. So that was a consideration at the time, but there's no guarantee going forward. And this isn't about the person, it's about the position. And so there's no guarantee in the future that the mayor will be guaranteed that. So I just think it's more appropriate that he's in the 25,000 range, just because with the mayor, you're pretty well on call daily for in case you're needed for various things. And in Bowen Island, for example, it's 23,353 for the mayor, and Tofino's 23,343, Euclid's 24,000 plus. So, and they're smaller, they have lower populations considerably than we do here. And this was back in December 2018, these figures. And the other factor is, the other reason we made our increase in remuneration was that was the year 2019, the federal government deleted the 1/3 of our remuneration being tax-free. So it put behind, and as a consequence, I had heard that many municipalities that year also increased their remuneration to compensate for the loss of that 1/3 deductibility. So those are basically the reasons. It's just a question of fairness and the ratio of mayor to councillor, having it more in line with what others are. And it's a very small increase, just between $5,000 and $6,000. That's all it is. Thank you.
Okay, through to Councillor Gusselbreck is the second, or sorry, go ahead, or Director Coates.
Just for clarity, the bylaw that you currently have, it was amended in 2018. It added at that time a calculation going forward of what the increases would be. So the numbers that are shown in this bylaw are not the numbers of the rates currently in effect. So it would be less than 5,000 or 6,000.
Okay, so through to you, Councillor Gusselbreck.
Nobody's going to jump from private industry to become a mayor, even of lovely Lantzville, for $25,000. Not only the mayor, but all council spend many hours, and I doubt any of us do it for the remuneration. The mayor has a difficult job. He's dealing with the public. He's going to public presentations, funerals, et cetera. So, for $2 an hour, nobody's going to jump at it, but I'm in favor of it. It may be some inducement for future mayoral hopefuls, but let's do it.
Okay, additional speakers. For myself, I had no idea, but anyways, I just kind of assumed that would be the wage it was going to be for the term. And it is one of those rare items that as a mayor, I'm not in conflict speaking about an increase for myself, but again, like Councillor Gusselbreck's indicated, you don't necessarily sign up to do this for the money. There's a lot of hours that are put in, and it's, if anything, it's just trying to keep up with what it seems to be fair across the board and with my counterparts and other municipalities. So just like everybody else that asks for maybe a little bit of fairness, I think this is all this does. It brings up to a fair comparable to other municipalities. Additional speakers, so we have Councillor Wilson.
I can get behind this. I do think that it is important that when we make decisions such as this one, that we are looking at what other municipalities of similar size are doing, not just when it comes to the mayor remuneration, but when it comes to staffing levels of service. And I think that this ties in with that as well. So I can get behind this as well.
All right, any additional speakers before I call the question on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor and opposed, noting that Councillor, is that unanimous, or was that Councillor Proctor opposed?
I raised my hand at the same time Councillor Wilson
Oh,
did.
sorry,
I'm
it was
for
just
the
a
motion.
little bit of delay on our screen here, that's all. All right, so that's
And
carried
Councillor Wilson
unanimously.
wasn't delayed?
Well, I don't know, it was when I looked up, yours was behind his. All right, additional amendments. Okay, through to you, Councillor Savage.
That the draft 2022 to 2026 financial plan be amended in tab 6 by contributing $5,000 to a new reserve fund for expanding the community water system, and that staff be instructed to create this reserve fund.
I'm going to need it again, sorry.
Okay, through to you, Councillor Savage, if you could just slowly restate that for Director Coates, please.
Okay, it's the generic beginning that the draft financial plan be amended in tab 6 by contributing $5,000 to a new reserve fund for expanding the community water system. And that staff be instructed to create this reserve fund.
Sorry for clarity, is it contributing 5,000 in each year of the financial plan, or is it in 2022, or?
I'll amend that by contributing 5,000 in 2022.
Second.
Okay, that's seconded by Councillor Wilson. Got it all, Director Coates?
And that staff be instructed to prepare this reserve fund, is that what? Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Through to Councillor Savage, if you want to speak to your motion or amendment.
Yeah, this is quite straightforward. We already have the Waterworks Replacement Reserve Fund, which can be used for water system expansion, but it's not solely for that, and it's usually is spent on replacement, not expansion. You'll see there's a fairly large amount this year being taken out of it. And the idea is we just have to start somewhere. The grant application to get water to the Winds service area have been turned down so far. There's been a number of them. So by creating a reserve, it's a starting point. And 5,000 is not much to start with, but in the future we can look at different ways to make it grow. For example, I know the Foothills MOU, it was talked about before, about the suggestion of a per lot cash amenity, and the idea was, or there was talk, this would go towards getting water to the Winds. And as a question to staff, please, with the district-built water pipe, is it the case there would be latecomer fees charged to future subdivisions, or is it done through connection fees, in which case the money goes to Nanaimo?
Connection fees go to Nanaimo under the agreement with Nanaimo.
So the vehicle for latecomer fees are the connection fees then, eh?
No. Latecomer fees are separate, but that has to be done by bylaw. So you would have to, council would have to determine what properties are latecomers and do it through a bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And as a follow-up, would water DCs be permitted to be deposited into such a reserve, or do they need to be kept in a DCC reserve until spent on a qualifying project?
They would have to be kept in a DCC reserve.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's about it then. It's just the idea of a starting point, so we're starting to build
Director
up funds for this. Thank you.
Coates. Yeah.
Sorry, I might have missed the first part of your question or comment. Were you indicating for one of the water local area services? Because there wouldn't be latecomer fees. It's a local area service is established by bylaw with a boundary, and any lots created within there automatically pay. And then if the boundary gets expanded, it's only done through a process where it comes to council.
No, Council, Director Coates, what Councillor Savage had asked is if there's latecomer fees if the municipality put the water connections in. Or I should say the.
So it would not be a local area service. Thank you.
Okay. Tricky information. Councillor Wilson as the seconder.
Sorry, I just want to clarify, it was for staff be instructed to prepare this reserve fund. So just for clarity, 99% of the time, your reserve funds have been established by bylaw. That would come back to council.
Would you need that word added, Director Coates, like a reserve fund bylaw, or does it?
I think that would probably be good.
Okay, I'll just.
Instruct to prepare a reserve fund bylaw. How about that?
So we'll just do it through unanimous consent of council unless anybody objects, just to add on the word bylaw to the amendment motion. So unless anybody strongly, or anybody objects, we'll just do it that way. Okay. All right, so Councillor Wilson is the seconder.
Other than it just being a good placeholder for this, I can support it. It's a good idea.
Okay. Any additional speakers on this? Okay, sorry. Director Coates.
Sorry, I've really opened a can of worms by mentioning the bylaw. So usually the instruction, we'd have some instruction in relation to how the bylaw would be structured, like when would contributions happen, where would the money be coming from? I mean, we can bring it forward to you as a bare bones bylaw that just says there's a one-time deposit of $5,000 in the financial plan in that year, but normally the other reserve funds have a descriptor in them of whether it's that much, you know.
Well, I think C.O. Campbell is a bit of a wizard when it comes to creating bylaws, and we've had a lot of them over the last term, so
Your Worship,
whatever we could. Yes, go ahead, C.O. Campbell.
Now, what Director Coates just said is exactly right. We would need to have, is it, how do we raise the money? How often do we put it in? All that has to be in the bylaw itself.
So through to, I guess, Councillor Savage, would you want an annual contribution of 5,000? I think that would probably help the motion.
Yes, I do hearken back to the property acquisition bylaw we did. And I remember it was very lean the first year, and it's quite optional each year, but I think there may be a minimum each year, I'm not sure. So if we did have that 5,000 per year then out of taxation, then I don't think that's onerous, and that would simply be a minimum amount. And as we ran into other funding, we could.
So if I may, Councillor Savage, and just again, by unanimous consent through to council, just add the word annual after, annual contribution. So it'd be an annual contribution of 5,000. So again, just through, if any member of council objects, this would be the time to object. And we're just kind of creating an amendment motion that kind of works on the fly. But anyways, Councillor Kesselbart.
Yes, $5,000 is not going to make any difference in this budget. I'm confused by the responses we've gotten from CAO Campbell as well as Director Coates. I think there's much more to implement Councillor Savage's proposed amendment here. I recall that when we did the land acquisition bylaw as a separate bylaw, it was brought by staff to council with a report that we acted on. We're now in budget discussions. I'm uncomfortable with the sort of patched together wording we have here. It's always good to get proposed amendments ahead of time so that we have a chance to think about them. So I'm going to propose that without dismissing this amendment out of hand, I'm going to propose that we postpone this amendment to the next budget meeting with the hope that in the meantime, Councillor Savage will work with staff to flesh this out and see if there's any hidden minefields in attempting to implement it. So that's my motion to postpone to the next budget meeting.
Do we have a seconder to the postponement? So that'd be to November 8th, I believe. Is that right? November 8th? That'd be our next.
That's what I was, yes.
Okay, so that's seconded by Councillor Proctor. And then again, it's just.
That's a Monday special council meeting. That was for the financial plan to be held if required, so this would make it required. So November 8th.
So through to staff, we do have the other motion, that we'll likely look at the end of the meeting. Do we still need to have that, the next meeting to review the amendments, or can we not have all the amendments just come back at a later date to I think the November 24th date?
Well, the practice has been to try to get the financial plan to a point where you're closing off your amendments so that the one that goes out to the public is in its, further along in its preparation. So it would change our timeline if you don't have the meeting on the 8th, if you want to make amendments.
Okay, fair enough. And I just through to council, I think the November 8th meeting would just be more of a housekeeping meeting, make sure council is comfortable with the wording of the amendments or the amended plan, but I don't think any further amendments would be warranted at that time. It'd probably be a little out of order to bring those unless there's really strong rationale to do so.
But for clarity, this amendment won't be in it.
No.
In the financial plan because it's still on the floor. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so Director Hare, I see your hands up, and I think I saw Councillor Wilson's hand go up as well. So Director Hare? You might be muted.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So if I was just going to ask if I could make a suggestion, if council wishes to have given the amount of this contribution, we could add a $5,000 contribution provision to a new reserve without a reference to the reserve fund bylaw at this point in time. And then council can have future discussion on the creation of the reserve, the way it should be created if we want to create a reserve at a later time, because we've got the entire year. All we want to do is get a $5,000 provision in the budget with the intention of a contribution to a reserve here, and we should be able to do that.
Okay, that makes perfectly good sense to me. Through to Councillor Wilson.
I was just hoping that we could, for just one item, I was hoping that we could avoid scheduling another meeting. So I like Director Hare's suggestion.
Through to staff, I believe we have another meeting because there's already been an amendment made regarding the mayor's salary piece. So with that,
Just for clarity, if you're making amendments tonight and you're finalizing amendments, then it goes to Director Hare. He puts it into the financial plan. And then if there's no desire to vote on more amendments on the 8th, you can just, the next meeting would be the one on November 24th, when you present it to the public. Even with the motion that was here, I don't think there was any intention that you were doing the bylaw before the financial plan. But the situation you have right now, and I guess we're kind of getting off topic here, because the motion that's on the floor is to postpone to November 8th. So there's a motion on the floor, although was there a seconder? I didn't hear you call
yes,
that.
Councillor Proctor, I believe, seconded that one.
Point of information, I'm still not clear if we are going to, if at this point, without this motion that's just on the floor, are we going to have a November 7th meeting? Will the November 7th meeting be required?
November 8th? No, it would not be required without this motion to refer.
Okay, thank you.
So suggestion just to vote it down?
Yeah, look, let's move on. I'm happy to withdraw my motion to postpone, and if it's just putting a marker in there, let's do it and get on with it.
We'll just do it by unanimous consent then to withdraw the motion on the floor, so unless anybody objects, this would be the time to do so. Okay, so the motion's withdrawn. Okay.
So now you're voting on the main motion, the financial plan be amended in tab 6 by contributing $5,000 annually to a new reserve fund for expanding the community water system, blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, any further questions, debate on this, or can I call the question? Okay, I will move to calling the question. All those in favor, opposed, that's carried unanimously. Okay. That takes us on to any further amendments. Okay, Councillor Savage.
All right, this is my last one. Very simple. That the draft 2022 to 26 financial plan be amended in tab 3 by postponing the hiring of a planner until 2023.
Okay, do we have a seconder to that? Okay, hearing no seconder, it fails due to lack of seconder, so
Okay, I have an amendment to that. Oh, it fails. I'd have another last quick motion then, please.
All right, so go ahead.
That the draft 2026 financial plan be amended in tab 3 by adding the hiring of a second public works position and removing the hiring of a planner.
Okay, I'll second that one purely for discussion purposes at this point, but go ahead, Councillor Savage.
Yes, basically what it is, we'd be hiring 2 public works people for 2022, and then doing the hiring of a planner in the next budget, where it would happen in 2023. And the idea of this is, throughout our budget since we started, there was the recommendation to have these positions spread out, so one would be in 2022, one in 2023. However, I think we're all taking it very much to heart that the assets we do have, it's very serious that they're maintained, and we heard from Director Spears about that, and maintenance just doesn't mean, looking after lawns and potholes and roads and so on. There's some very important infrastructure especially with 2 new reservoirs now and the pump stations and so on. It would be a shame if they're not maintained as much as they should be, so they deteriorate unnecessarily. So that's why I'm looking at that this is just prioritizing things, and I see the absolute top priority now is to have public works, plus it's a lesser amount of money, $106,000 versus in the neighborhood of $80,000. And so it's just prioritizing where we really have to take this seriously, looking after our infrastructure, and that I think we're fine for another, just waiting another year for the planning position. After all, it wasn't too long ago we had a contracted planning position, not a full-time or hired position. So now that we have a full-time planning position, I think it's enough for now without a second planner. So that's the idea of it. Thank you.
Okay, Director Coates?
If I could just get a repeat on the motion, I just want to make sure we've captured that.
Yeah, just if you can just restate it.
That the draft 2022 to 2025 financial plan be amended by, in tab 3, by adding the hiring of a second public works position and removing the planner position.
And what year was that, those things happening in?
That's for 2022.
And sorry, it was 2022 to 2026? I think the first statement you said 2025, so.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
For myself, yeah, this is interesting. With respect to the public works position that's already in the financial plan, so I guess my question would be directed to Director Hare. I recall from the presentation that would be funded not from taxation or property taxation. What would be the funding sources for the first public works position?
The position is funded through non-taxation revenue.
Okay. All right. I somewhat agree with what Councillor Savage has indicated. It is about setting priorities in terms of staffing within the municipality, and you know, as a member of this council, I haven't heard of any complaints from the building community or residents with respect to how quickly things are moving through our doors here with respect to building applications and so forth. And I know within the region that is not the case. Significant waits in magnitude of months, not maybe a couple weeks, as typically experienced here. So I don't see the service necessarily sliding to the point where we need to be seriously addressing it. Obviously, we want to maintain great levels of services for our residents and for the building community, but while at the same time, you know, we have been keenly aware of how understaffed our public works has been over the last number of years, and ultimately, if we are making the tough decisions, or if we're going to make the tough decision and go say yes, we're going to go ahead with what a lot of residents will consider a lofty tax increase. I think having two public works would likely better serve the public than increasing staffing in the planning department. So with that being said, I can support the motion. And again, like I do believe we need to look at building services and keeping the staffing up, but until we start falling off a little bit in that department, and there's significant issues as we're hearing from other areas, then I can support this motion. So additional speakers. So we have Councillor Gusbrecht and then Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I can't support the motion. We've actually hired 2 new public works positions in the last 2 years. Yes, they're still understaffed, and I hope that we can address that in the next year. But maintaining our assets is not simply cutting the lawns. It is bringing in revenue through the new development. We know that there's new development. We're not out looking for it. It's here. It's knocking on the doors. And as the mayor said, surrounding municipalities have big problems with addressing development applications, permits, inspections, et cetera, et cetera. We are lucky so far that we don't have a backlog. Don't forget, besides DCCs, which we collect on every new lot that's created, when the owner goes to build a house or the developer builds it himself, the planning department charges a fee, a 4% fee, based on the value of the permit being applied for. For example, if I want to build, put in a $100,000 addition and I apply for the permit, there's a $4,000 fee that goes to the district. And please, Director Young, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So this is additional revenue that's coming in to pay for these positions that we've hired, to pay for other operating expenses, to assist. So I'm happy to leave the financial plan the way that it is. This has been prepared by staff, recommended by staff, with the rationale given to us by the Director of Finance. So I'm not prepared to monkey with it at this point.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
I think that also too, when you, I can't support the motion because there's also a lot more to consider. I believe that if we are also going to hire more public works, that's going to also mean that we all of a sudden need to buy more trucks so that they can actually fulfill the jobs that they need to do. And also you have to remember there's a training component, and bringing on more people is more people to train. And it is hard to find people right now that are competent and reliable. So I think, the challenge will be to find one good public works employee that's going to work for our district. I also would like to hear from either CAO Campbell or Director Young as to, just what things are like within the planning department right now, and why they have recommended the hiring of this position. I've heard it before, but I think it's important that, we hear it again. Or I see Director Hare has his hand up, so maybe he wants to answer.
Okay, go ahead, Director Hare.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, through Councillor Wilson, I wish Director Young had been on the call, but I'll speak on his behalf. So in the report that I had written to Council, it identified that the new planner will be responsible for current and long-range planning, assisting with building inspection services, assisting with bylaw compliance services, economic development, parks, trails, planning, and implementation of special projects. And the position is required in order to meet basic service level expectations for planning and community services. We've experienced a significantly increased number of planning application and inquiries from current Lantzville landowners over the several past years, and it's been a compounding issues. And so over the past 2 years, we've employed a full-time economic development officer, which was funded through grants. And so we've actually lost that position. So there is a high demand for service in the planning area. And in the short time I've been with the municipality, if I can share, Director Young is doing an amazing job at managing his department. And my observation, if I had to look forward, is there is way more work than one person can handle in the planning department.
Your Worship, if you take a look at the report, exactly what Director Hare just said, the last 2 years we've had a economic development officer. We don't have that anymore. This proposed planning position will take that on, as well as the other things outlined within the report.
Okay, any additional follow-ups, Councillor Wilson? Okay, any further debate from council? I'm likely inclined to call the question here. All right, so I move to call in question. All those in favor and opposed, noting that Councillor Gusselbrecht, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Proctor opposed, the amendment fails. All right, so if you can, staff, please put the motion from earlier back up on the projector. That'd be much appreciated. And Councillor Proctor, I see your hands up. Do you have an amendment to suggest, or is this in relation to the motion that's going to come up?
I just wanted to make the motion.
Okay.
Should I read it?
Well, if you're able to, I don't know if you, can you see the one we have on our screen? I don't know.
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, perfect. If you want to read it, go ahead.
That the 2022-2026 financial plan based on information provided to council at the October 13th and October 27th budget meeting be presented to the public on November 24th and subsequently to council for first 3 readings.
Okay, so we have that seconded by Councillor Gusselbrecht. Discussion on the recommendation, and again, just sticking to the recommendation, not getting into too much rehashing of the nitty-gritty details.
I don't have any nitty-gritty to give. I don't have anything else to add.
Councillor, okay, and through to the secondary, Councillor Gusselbrecht.
Nothing more, thank you.
Okay, and through the rest of the council. All right, so hearing none, I will move to calling the question. All those in favor and opposed, noting that Councillor Savage is opposed, the motion carries. And I believe that concludes our agenda. So unless there's anything further from council, okay, hearing and seeing none, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.